There we go. All right, I'm here with Professor Loehlin from the University of Texas, where I'm sure some of you are eager to attend. We're going to talk Dr. Faustus from Christopher Marlowe. What is the continued lore of Dr. Faustus? We're talking about a play a little over 400 years old, and we still teach it, read it. What's its lure?
Well, I think it's just the power of the central idea of a character making a deal with the devil, and I think that's a myth that is pervasive in our culture a lot, and it's just very compelling to think about someone literally selling their soul to achieve, these aspirations and desires. And I think it's, it is a kind of cautionary tale that the, not only, is Faustus dragged down to hell after his 24 years, but even while he is trying to enjoy his powers, he is unable to, and his character is sort of diminished over the course of the play. And that, I think, is a metaphor that we find kind of very potent about people's own desires and ambitions, and the things that we give up, the ways that we compromise ourselves, and so forth. But I also think it's a theatrically extremely entertaining play. The myth is potent, but the play itself has a lot of potency and still plays very well on stage. The characters of Faustus and Mephistopheles, the devil,
Right.
are wonderful characters, have these great interactions, and then all of the things that Faustus does over the course of the play have a lot of entertainment value as well.
You mentioned Faustus's desires. Are his desires, when he gains this power, are his desires worthy? I mean, what does he do with these desires? He has this power now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's really interesting, that Faustus is introduced to us as this kind of character of high achievement and ambition, and I'm slightly thinking of him in relation to some of the other heroes of Christopher Marlowe, the playwright, who are have been described as overreachers. They're these characters of great stature who speak this rich, grand Renaissance rhetoric, and make these big soliloquies and so forth about the things that they want and the things that they're going to achieve. And Faustus is like that, I think, at the beginning of the play, in this desire for knowledge, which I think we can think is an admirable desire in some ways. So he seems to have these sort of high ambitions. But once he's made the bargain, we see him kind of gradually deteriorate, so that by the end of the play, he's just like playing jokes on people, or fetching grapes for the Duchess, and doing kind of corny kind of barroom pranks. And so there's, I think, a warning in that like having access to unbridled desires is not necessarily like you think you'll use your powers in some kind of grand way, but in the end you'll sort of run out of things to try to achieve, and that you'll kind of be reduced to some of your kind of lowest appetites, which I think is a potent part of the story.
Is this the reason that Marlowe inserts a lot of comic relief?
Partly, yes. I think the comic dimensions of Dr. Faustus have often kind of struck people as incongruous in terms of the story of Faustus and his damnation is so kind of powerful and curious that people have, often thought, oh, maybe these were stuck in by some other playwright, which is certainly possible. But the fact is that the source for Dr. Faustus, the German Faust book, and then the English Faust book that was translated from it and that Marlowe used as a source, those also contain sort of low comic episodes and the business of, kind of making a fool of the cardinals in the Vatican, or putting horns on the head of this courtier, and a lot of those kind of like low comic episodes seem to be part of the tale from its sort of medieval origins. So Marlowe or his collaborators didn't, strictly speaking, invent those. But yes, I think that the purpose that they serve is to, initially, there are scenes with a kind of, with Faustus's servant Wagner, and Robin and Dick, or Robin and Rafe, depending on which version you're looking at, these servants who are also kind of playing around with demonic powers and getting into trouble and so forth. Right. Those kind of counterpoint the Faustus story in a kind of ironic, kind of low comedy way. But by the end of the play, Faustus is sort of sunk to the level of those guys and is actually playing tricks on them and interacting with these kind of low comedy characters. And I think that's a part of his fate.
You hit on the origins of the story. Marlowe wrote this, late 1500s?
Yeah, we don't know exactly, but, sometime around 1590.
How far back does the legend of Faust extend prior to Marlowe's writing of the play?
So there seems to have been a real guy named Johann Faustus who died around 1540. So really only about 50 years before Marlowe was writing the play. There was some kind of German, alchemist / astrologer / charlatan who was, doing tricks and experiments and, maybe allegedly had a pact with the devil. And this kind of got into legend and then into print in this book, the German Faust book, which was published, I think, 1587, and an English version was published in 1592. So it's likely that that's when Marlowe wrote the play. But so yeah, there was this legend about this real person, which was not all that far in the past. But there are many older legends just about, magicians and alchemists with, kind of demonic connections going back through the Middle Ages. And then I think some of the, there are analogs to some aspects of the story going back even to classical literature. So like King Midas might be a figure that would be comparable to Faust in a sort of be careful what you wish for cautionary tale.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Johann. I read a story once, and I don't know if it's true or not, obviously, where he was doing an experiment and he died by the experiment blowing up in his lab, and his eyes were like found on a pile of a dung heap.
Yeah, that
alchemical mishap.
Yeah, I've also heard of that story, and again, these are sort of legends, but some of that comes through in the Faust book, that his, when he's found the morning after the bargain expires, his fellow scholars go to look for him, and he's been kind of exploded, and pieces of him are found, around the ruins of his house.
What we read after this play is actually Frankenstein. So this is a great lead to Frankenstein, because you mentioned the alchemists of the Middle Ages that Mary Shelley obviously brings into the text. Can you touch on these alchemists? You don't have to mention them by name necessarily, Paracelsus, etc., but how they are an influence into the Faust legend, which Mary pulls from.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there were lots of people in the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance who were interested in trying to turn lead into gold, among other things. This was always the primary goal. But it was an early form of science. I mean, these were people who were doing chemical experiments, but it also had a cult, mystical dimension to it, very complicated sort of symbology and use of very specific terminology. There's another great play from the Renaissance called The Alchemist by Ben Jonson that is a sort of comic version of this, in which the characters, as many of them no doubt were, are basically con men. That the alchemy. Certainly there were some people who were trying to advance the cause of learning and discover things, or actually convert lead to gold for purposes of greed or whatever. But many quickly realized that you don't actually have to convert lead into gold or raise spirits and so forth, as long as you can get people to believe that you do that and get them to pay you for it. So there no doubt was some fraud involved, and I think you get echoes of that a little bit in the Faustus tales.
The play opens and closes with what you mentioned earlier, soliloquies. What is framed inside these soliloquies? What should my students be on the lookout for inside the soliloquies?
Good. I think, well, two main things. One is the sort of ongoing drama of Faustus's pact, so that he doesn't just, sign his soul away, right at the close of his first soliloquy and then, go off on his adventures. He has a lot of uncertainty and sort of, hesitation and backsliding and trying to get out of it and so forth. That create, there's a lot of drama over several scenes on that story, and in particular involving the good and evil angels who kind of appear and try to persuade him to repent or to boldly go forward with the devil.
The little consciences on the shoulder.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's a very recognizable kind of modern archetype that we still use, that I guess comes from the medieval morality play tradition. But the idea of a kind of everyman figure and a tempter on one side and a good angel on the other side. And I think that's an aspect of Faustus that we can still recognize, from a lot of movies, use that even in a kind of metaphorical way. So anyway, the drama of Faustus's selling of his soul, his attempts to kind of get out of the deal, the things that the devils do, like the 7 deadly sins, are part of a kind of pageant that they produce to try to seduce him. So there's that dimension, and then the other dimension is sort of Faustus's adventures, right? The things that he does with his powers, which range from sort of taking this kind of world tour to playing tricks on the Pope and the cardinals, and entertaining the emperor, conjuring up the spirit of Helen of Troy and Alexander the Great and so forth. But also these kind of lower things like getting Mephistopheles to fetch grapes from the other side of the world, which is an interesting and sort of entertaining notion that the Mephistopheles even explains about, there's 2 hemispheres, and when it's winter in one, it's summer in the other, and you can import fruit that's in season somewhere else, and so forth. So there's little kind of like fun bits like that, and then the kind of low comedy with Robin and Rafe and so forth. That over the course of the play, we see kind of Faustus losing his great ambitions and just becoming a kind of low trickster, but also becoming aware that his 24 years are running out, right? And then the play takes a much more serious turn toward the end, especially in that final soliloquy when he's just waiting for the midnight hour to strike.
Gotcha. Here's a more fun question. What's your favorite cultural reference from Faust? Because off the top of my head, I can think of, The Devil Goes Down to Georgia by Charlie Daniels Band. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, where the guitarist Tommy Johnson sold his soul to the devil off of Robert Johnson. The Bart Simpson sold his soul to Millhouse. The movie Bedazzled. What's your favorite cultural reference?
I love the original movie Bedazzled with Peter Cook and Dudley Moore from the 1960s, which I think is a really brilliant take on the Faust legend. Very enjoyable and very literate version. And I think the other one's okay as well, but I think the original is great. I don't know. I was thinking about this earlier and thinking about the power of that. Moral decision in films, and I thought of a couple of films from my, when I was in college or whatever that used that film. Two films by Oliver Stone. One is Wall Street, where the kind of Charlie Sheen everyman character is kind of seduced by with Gordon Gekko into this terrible life as a Wall Street trader, and I think his father, Martin Sheen, who's his actual father, plays the kind of good, small business, hardworking kind of person that he betrays. So that's definitely a kind of version of this. But also Platoon, Oliver Stone's Vietnam film, has also Charlie Sheen as the everyman, kind of pulled between the evil Tom Berenger, kind of war criminal, and the good soldier played by Willem Dafoe. And it's that situation, that metaphor is so transparent in those films, but still really, really powerful, because people have to make moral decisions. You have to weigh their values against their desires all the time. And I suppose there's a lot in the Star Wars films that have to do with that question of going to the dark side, or sort of upholding the values of the Jedi or something like that. So yeah, it's everywhere.
Would you say then, if you had to boil it down, because I didn't think of movies like Platoon, which is a powerful movie, would you say then that for my students, and obviously all students, that the idea of that moral decision, which you have to consciously make, is that the crux of this play?
Yeah, I think so. That, everybody will be faced with situations in life where they may be tempted to make a kind of Faustian bargain, and you have to really think through and understand what's involved in that. And I think a thing that is part of the story the play tells, that is really what makes it really powerful to me, is that it's not that Faustus loses his soul at the end of his 24 years, right? That he, makes the bargain, gets to enjoy all the things he wants to enjoy, and then has to pay. He loses his soul the moment he makes the bargain. Mm-hmm. And that's the story that the play tells, that the even in deciding to do this, he has lost the perspective and the moral compass and the high ambitions and so forth that he had going into it. And he's compromised from the beginning, and he's diminished from the beginning. And I think that is something that people might not reflect on in facing those kinds of decisions in their own lives.
In our current world, COVID-19, Black Lives Matter, and whatever else may happen in 2020, how is this play still relevant? How does this play speak to us?
I think it does. Just in encouraging people to, look inward, reflect on themselves, realize that everyone is vulnerable, certainly in terms of COVID-19. And then also to kind of be conscious of the dangers of privilege, maybe that that privilege can be a kind of trap, and that one can become obsessed with one's own status and achievements and fulfilling desires in a kind of material way that is unconscious of the situations of others, and that's not a satisfying, that doesn't help the world, but it's not a satisfying way of life for the person living it either. Mm-hmm. That having some, that there's more value in sort of making right moral choices and thinking of others and trying to, improve the world than in just, slaking your own desires and being content in your own, privileged position and so forth. So I think that, people are thinking a lot about ethical and moral choices these days, and about, the positions that different people find themselves in, and ways of reimagining society and so forth. And I think Faustus is a good kind of warning about being selfish.
That's a fair answer. Last question: what do you love most about this play?
I mean, I really love it all. I've come to really enjoy it. There was a time when I, thought, okay, it's really, it's the story of Faustus, and all this comic stuff doesn't have a place in there, and so forth. But I've kind of learned to appreciate that mixture of the tragic and the comic, which I think is very characteristic of Elizabethan drama at its best. But I think the scenes between Faustus and Mephistopheles are really the ones that that compel me the most, and the way, I don't know, there's the one scene where Faustus is asking in all these questions before signing the bargain. He asks, right, where Mephistopheles is, and he says in hell, and Faustus is like, you're kidding. What are you, this doesn't seem so bad. How can you possibly be in hell? You're here in my study with me. And Mephistopheles says, why, this is hell, nor am I out of it. And talks about how, his fallen condition is so terrible that he exists in hell wherever he is. And I think that sort of becomes true for Faustus as well. And that, I think, is an idea that is powerful, like, whether you're a religious person or not, or whether you kind of just think about it sort of psychologically or metaphorically, that idea of the kind of hell that you can make for yourself, right, is a really powerful one.
Yeah, because Milton said that in Paradise Lost, you can make a hell of heaven and a heaven of hell.
Yeah. Milton definitely, Paradise Lost definitely kind of builds on some things in Marlowe's play, which Milton certainly knew, I think.
Professor Loehlin, I greatly appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure, and I hope your students enjoy this play. I have learned to really love it over the years, so I'm glad that you're teaching it and giving them a chance to experience it.
You'll be happy to know that I looked for your book on Amazon, and it is currently out of stock.
Okay, well, I hope you can they can get some more in. But yeah, if you end up having trouble and want to have a look at it, I'll see if I can find you a copy.
I'll pick one up, and when I come down for Texas Relays in the spring, and take you to lunch at Schultz's.
Oh, thanks. That sounds great. Hopefully we'll all be able to be in the same room together at that time.
Exactly. Sir, you have a wonderful day, and I appreciate your time again.
Okay, thank you.